The year is 1324. In a shivering hamlet on the edge of the French Pyrenees, a 14-year-old girl named Alix feels a terrifying, warm dampness spreading against her inner thigh. In a modern world, this is a milestone of health. Here, in the shadow of the Great Famine, it is a mark of corruption. The air smells of damp peat and the metallic tang of iron. Alix looks down at the dirt floor of her hovel, watching a single red drop disappear into the dust, and her heart hammers against her ribs like a trapped bird. She hasn't just started her cycle. She has just become unclean in a world that believes her very breath can wither a harvest or turn a bowl of fresh milk into poison. This is the era where biology meets theology in a violent collision, and the tools you have to manage this change are more likely to kill you than comfort you. We'll use AI reconstructions to bring this world into focus. If you think a period is just a monthly inconvenience, you've never faced one in a century where your own blood was considered a literal curse from the mouth of God. Alix is suddenly shoved out of the communal bakery, the scent of rising yeast replaced by the stinging slap of the winter air. Her mother's face is a mask of panic, not for her daughter's health, but for the bread that might now fail to rise. Quick check-in. Comment your location and local time, and subscribe for more cinematic history. In the 1300s, the survival rules for a woman are dictated by the De Secretis Mulierum. This medieval text warns that a menstruating woman carries a hidden poison in her veins. If she looks into a polished bronze mirror, the metal will tarnish forever. If she walks through a garden, the plants will shrivel beneath her feet. You aren't just bleeding, you are a walking biohazard. You are forbidden from touching the communal water supply, from entering the church, and from preparing food for the men. To defy these rules is to invite the wrath of a community already living on the knife edge of starvation. The logistics of this first day are a nightmare of medieval engineering. You don't have underwear. In the 14th century, brays, or breeches, are strictly for men, and women wear nothing beneath their heavy wool chemises. To catch the flow, Alix must fashion a clout, a strip of coarse, undyed linen. She ties a hempen cord around her waist and pins the rag to it, pulling it tight against her skin. The linen isn't soft. It's a recycled scrap of an old tunic, stiff with years of lye washing and rough as sandpaper. Within hours of walking through the muddy village lanes, the friction of the hemp cord and the rough linen begins to saw into her hips. This is the money shot of medieval misery. The chafing isn't just a rash, it is a systematic stripping of the skin, creating raw, weeping sores in an environment where the air is thick with the dust of dried animal dung and the smoke of peat fires. The new threat emerges when you realize that cleanliness is a sin of vanity. Alix cannot wash her rags in the stream. That would poison the village's water. She cannot use soap, as it is a luxury for the wealthy, and rubbing the raw sores with lye would be like pouring liquid fire into her veins. Instead, she is told to staunch the flow with dried moss or wood ash tucked into the linen. By the end of this part, you'll know why these natural absorbents were a death sentence. The moss, gathered from the damp forest floor, is teeming with microscopic fungi and the larvae of biting insects. As Alix huddles in the corner of a drafty barn, the only place she's allowed to sleep, she feels a strange, throbbing heat beginning to radiate from her groin. It isn't the warmth of a fire. It's the first stage of an infection that her community will soon mistake for the devil's touch. But the worst part is yet to come. Because as the sun sets, her body begins to react to the poison she's been told she carried. The throbbing in Alix's hips has moved from a dull sting to a rhythmic, white-hot heat that makes every step a jagged agony. One câu nhắc lại open loop từ phần trước. The moss she tucked into her linen clouts, intended to save her from shame, has now become a bridge for something far more predatory. A new threat emerges: the stagnant humor. According to the physicians of the University of Paris, your blood isn't just leaking, it is boiling over because your body is too weak to process it. By the end of this part, you'll know why a simple bowl of rye pottage was the catalyst for a total physical collapse. In the 14th century, you aren't just fighting biology. You are fighting the lingering effects of the Great Famine that stunted your very bones. The logistics of the containment are as primitive as they are dangerous. Alix is forced to use peat pads, dried bog moss wrapped in scraps of wool. The moss is incredibly absorbent, but it is also abrasive and impossible to sanitize. As she moves, the peat fibers work their way into the raw sores on her thighs, acting like tiny, dirty needles, delivering bacteria directly into her lymphatic system. She looks down and sees red streaks beginning to climb from the chafed skin toward her groin. To a modern eye, this is the onset of lymphangitis. To Alix's mother, it is the poison of the period, trying to find a way out of a body that is too closed. This is where the hazard stack hits the nutritional level. Alix's diet consists almost entirely of dark rye bread. In a damp year like 1324, this rye is often infected with ergot, a toxic fungus. For a girl already weakened by the onset of her first cycle, the ergot acts as a powerful vasoconstrictor. It begins to restrict the blood flow to her extremities, while simultaneously causing violent uterine contractions that are far more intense than normal cramps. She isn't just cramping. Her internal organs are being seized by a chemical fire. She tries to drink water to dull the pain, but the village well is a quarter-mile away, and she is forbidden from touching the bucket. She is forced to drink small beer, fermented, sour, and full of sediment, which only serves to dehydrate her further. The money shot of this struggle is the fainting spell. Because of chronic iron deficiency, the sudden loss of blood sends Alix's blood pressure into a free fall. She collapses in the dirt of the barn, her head striking a wooden plow. In the 14th century, a woman who faints during her time isn't seen as sick. She is seen as possessed by the vapors of her own menses. The payoff is a terrifying social consequence. The village women refuse to touch her to help her up. They believe that even the sweat of her brow is now a conduit for the evil eye. As she lies in the shadows, her head bleeding and her thighs burning with infection, a new figure enters the barn. It's the village leech woman, carrying a jar of dark, twisting shapes. But the cure she's bringing is about to turn a localized infection into a systemic war. The red streaks on Alix's thighs have turned a deep, angry purple, pulsing in time with the thudding in her skull. The new threat isn't the blood leaving her body. It's the humoral imbalance that the leech woman claims is rotting her from the inside out. By the end of this part, you'll know why the 14th century obsession with balance led to the literal draining of a girl's life force when she needed it most. In the medieval mind, your period isn't a cycle, it's a purgation. If the blood is dark or the flow is heavy, it's proof that your soul is weighed down by excessive, corrupt fluids that must be assisted in their escape. The logistics of the extraction are a brutal display of medieval surgery. The leech woman doesn't reach for bandages. She reaches for a ceramic jar filled with starving Hirudo medicinalis. She believes that by placing these parasites on Alix's inner thighs, near the already weeping sores, they will suck out the toxic heat of the menses. You feel the cold, slimy anchor of the leech's mouth as it saws into your skin with 3 rows of microscopic teeth. As the parasites engorge themselves on your already anemic blood, they inject an anticoagulant called hirudin. In a modern setting, this is controlled. In a 1324 barn, it means that once the leeches drop off, Alex's wounds will not stop bleeding. The environment of the barn now becomes an active predator. The floor is a layer of muck, a mixture of rotted straw, animal urine, and old hay. As Alex lies there, weakened by the leeches and the ergot-induced cramps, the open wounds on her thighs are in direct contact with the floor. This is the money shot of filth. The clouts she wears are now sodden with a mixture of menstrual blood, leech anticoagulant, and the literal liquid waste of the farm animals. The ammonia from the urine burns the raw skin, while the bacteria, Staphylococcus aureus, finds a highway directly into her bloodstream through the leech bites. But the new threat is the miasma of the womb. The leech woman begins to burn dried, fetid herbs, asafoetida and sulfur, directly under Alex's nose. The theory is that the womb is a living animal that shies away from bad smells, and by forcing Alex to inhale this choking yellow smoke, the midwife believes she is pushing the womb back into its proper place. Alex is coughing, her lungs burning, her vision blurring as the carbon monoxide from the charcoal brazier fills the unventilated corner. The payoff is a state of menstrual delirium. Alex begins to scream, not from pain, but from hallucinations triggered by the smoke and the ergot. To the women watching, this is the final proof. The blood has reached her brain. They decide that the only way to save her soul is to harden her body, and they prepare to move her from the warm muck of the barn to the one place that will ensure her heart stops before the sun rises. The delirium has turned Alex's world into a fractured kaleidoscope of soot and silver. One go neklai open loop du from tuk. The smoke that filled her lungs was supposed to seat her womb, but it has only served to mask the sweet, cloying scent of the gangrene now blooming in the folds of her linen clouts. A new threat emerges: the chilling. In the 14th century, a fever is not seen as an immune response, but as a boiling of the blood that must be extinguished by the elements. By the end of this part, you'll know why the most holy water in the village was the most lethal tool in the midwife's arsenal. The logistics of the tempering are a violent shock to a system already in collapse. The women carry Alex's limp body out of the barn and toward the stone baptistry of the village church. In their minds, the heat in her limbs is a fire of sin, and the only cure is a cold immersion. They strip her of the blood-soaked linen, exposing the raw, purple-black sores on her thighs to the biting midnight air. You feel the skin on your chest tighten and turn blue as the goose flesh rises, a desperate attempt by your body to trap the last of your internal heat. They don't just sprinkle her, they plunge her into a stone basin of stagnant, ice-cold water that hasn't been changed since the last feast day. This is the money shot of medieval trauma, the thermal shock. As the ice-cold water hits Alex's septic skin, her heart undergoes a massive sympathetic surge. Her blood vessels, already constricted by the ergot fungus in her bread, shut down almost entirely. The payoff is a phenomenon called internal drowning. The sudden cold causes her to gasp, drawing the scummy, bacteria-laden water of the basin into her lungs. The water is a soup of dead skin, dust, and the microscopic remnants of 100 other purifications. As she chokes, the bacteria in the water find a new home in her respiratory tract, setting the stage for a secondary pneumonia that will finish what the sepsis started. But the new threat is the tightening. To prevent her corrupt blood from reaching her heart after the bath, the midwife uses bindings. They wrap Alex's torso in strips of wet, unwashed wool, pulling them so tight that her ribs can barely expand. The belief is that this contains the humors. The reality is that it prevents her from coughing up the water in her lungs. She is becoming a prisoner within her own skin. As they carry her back to the barn, her skin is no longer red or purple. It is a waxen, mottled gray. The bridge to the midpoint is a chilling realization. The community thinks they have stabilized her because she has stopped screaming. No one tells you this part, but in 1324, the silence of a woman was often the first sign that the debt of Eve was about to be paid in full. The silence in the barn is broken only by the wet, rattling wheeze of Alex's breath, a sound the 14th century calls the death rattle, but is actually the fluid in her lungs turning into a stagnant swamp. One câu nhắc lại open loop từ phần trước. The wet wool bindings meant to contain her blood are now shrinking as they dry, crushing her chest like the coils of a cold snake. A new threat emerges, the midpoint rehook, the summer fever. It is now the height of a stagnant, humid July in the French lowlands, and the heat is doing something to the rot that the winter air could not. By the end of this part, you'll know why the very smell of a menstruating girl in 1324 could trigger a localized panic that ended in fire. The logistics of the putrefaction are a sensory assault. In the sweltering heat of the barn, the blood-soaked straw beneath Alex has begun to ferment. The ammonia levels are so high they sting the eyes of anyone who enters, but no one does. The community has moved from curing her to quarantining her. They believe the miasma coming off her body, a mix of menstrual copper, septic decay, and gangrenous tissue, is now a literal vapor of death. This is the money shot of the hazard stack, the scent of the grave. The flies have found her. They aren't just buzzing, they are colonizing the damp, dark folds of the wool bindings and the open sores on her thighs. In a world without screens or soap, Alex is no longer a human. She is an ecosystem. This is the pattern break of the survival rules. You might think her mother would stay by her side, but in the 14th century, the fear of spiritual contagion is stronger than maternal instinct. The priest has warned that to breathe the air of a corrupt woman is to invite a blight upon one's own soul. Alex is left with a single cracked wooden bowl of water, now warm and filmed with dust. She tries to reach for it, but the new threat is the lockjaw. The tetanus bacteria, introduced by the stable muck and the dirty moss clouts, has begun to seize her muscles. Her jaw is tight, her neck arched back in a permanent, agonizing spasm known as opisthotonos. The payoff of this midpoint is a brutal irony. The town is celebrating a Saint's Day outside. You can hear the distant, muffled sound of a pipe and tabor, the laughter of children who don't yet know the debt of Eve. Inside the barn, Alex is experiencing a sensory reset. Her vision is failing, but her sense of smell is hyper-acute. She smells the roasting pig from the festival, and it mixes with the smell of her own dying flesh. She is starving, dehydrated and septic, but her body refuses to let go. No one tells you this part, but the first period wasn't just a week of pain. In the height of summer, it was a slow-motion countdown. As the festival fire is lit in the village square, a spark drifts toward the thatch of the barn, and for a moment, Alex sees a different kind of light. The spark from the festival fire dies out on the damp thatch, but the heat inside Alex's veins is just beginning its final surge. One câu nhắc lại open loop to phần trước. The death rattle in her chest has deepened into a thick, gurgling struggle as the pneumonia takes root in her waterlogged lungs. A new threat emerges, the sore of the soul. In the 14th century, if a girl's first cycle doesn't end, it's believed her body is leaking because she has committed a secret sin. By the end of this part, you'll know why the absorbents they used to stop the leak were actually the primary engines of systemic collapse. The logistics of the plugging are a gruesome intersection of folk magic and primitive hygiene. Because Alex is still spotting through her fever, the midwife decides that the gate must be physically sealed. She doesn't use clean cotton. She uses a pestle of ash. This is a wad of scorched linen stuffed with a paste of lye ash, honey, and crushed eggshells. The honey is meant to draw the poison, but in the heat of the barn, it simply acts as a sugar-rich fuel for the streptococcus bacteria already devouring her tissues. This is the money shot of internal trauma, the chemical burn. The lye ash, being highly alkaline, begins to chemically cauterize the delicate internal membranes of the vaginal vault. Alex is too weak to scream, her jaw locked by tetanus, but her eyes roll back in a silent neurological protest. You are now witnessing the hazard stack reach its medical climax. Without the ability to swallow, Alex's tongue has swollen into a dry black lump that fills her mouth. The pattern break here is a shift in space. The barn has become a liminal room, a place between the living and the dead. The village women stand outside the door, tossing cleansing salt over the threshold, but refusing to step inside. They are waiting for the sign of the end, which they believe will be a blackening of the fingernails. In reality, the new threat is the disseminated intravascular coagulation. Her blood is starting to clot inside her own vessels, starving her brain and kidneys of oxygen. The payoff is a disturbing physiological revelation. Her skin begins to weep a clear yellowish fluid known as serous exudate. To the onlookers, this is the humors escaping. To a modern doctor, it is the total failure of her vascular system. She is essentially leaking from every pore. The bridge to the final descent is the arrival of the Sin Eater. He is a man paid to sit with the dying and absorb their transgressions through a piece of bread. He places a crust of rye on Alex's heaving chest, unaware that the bread is the only thing eating here, and what it's consuming is the last of her dignity. But as he reaches for the bread, he notices something the others missed. The evil eye hasn't just taken Alex. It started to move toward the door. The Sin Eater recoils, his shadow flickering against the barn's timber frame as he points a trembling finger at Alex's midsection. One go neklai open loop du fung tuk. The pestle of ash, meant to seal her womb, has instead triggered a chemical combustion of her internal tissues, and now the leak has turned into a flood of necrotic fluid. A new threat emerges: the barber surgeon's reach. Because Alex is the daughter of a freeman, the village council has spent their last coins to bring in a man of science to perform a final evacuation. By the end of this part, you'll know why the tools of the 14th century surgeon were more at home in a blacksmith's forge than a healing room. The logistics of the scouring are a masterpiece of medieval brutality. The barber surgeon doesn't believe in gentle intervention. He believes that corrupt matter must be physically scraped from the bone. He unfolds a roll of stained leather to reveal his speculum, a heavy three-pronged iron device that he greases with rancid lard. There is no privacy, no dignity, and no anesthesia. As he cranks the iron open to inspect the source of the rot, you feel the sickening sound of internal ligaments stretching to the point of failure. The money shot of this procedure is the curette of the damned, a long, spoon-like iron with a sharpened edge. He begins to scrape the lining of the vaginal vault and the cervix, believing he is removing the poisoned skin that caused the period to go wrong. With every stroke, he is tearing through the protective mucosal barrier and deep into the vascular tissue. The blood isn't just flowing, it's spraying onto his leather apron, a hot, dark crimson that smells of copper and decay. The payoff is a state of hemorrhagic shock. Alex's heart, already weakened by the week-long fever, begins to flutter like a dying moth. Her extremities turn ice cold as her body pulls the last of its blood toward its core in a desperate final stand. But the new threat is the surgeon's finishing move. To stop the massive bleeding he has just initiated, he calls for the red rod. He takes a poker from the brazier outside, glowing a terrifying translucent orange, and prepares to perform a cautery of the womb. The barn fills with a thick, white smoke and the unmistakable, oily stench of burning human hair and flesh. The pattern break is the sudden, absolute stillness that falls over Alex. Her eyes, once darting in fevered terror, become fixed on a single knot in the wooden ceiling. The bridge to the climax is a chilling medical reality. The surgeon thinks he has closed the wound, but he has only succeeded in sealing a massive, multi-strain bacterial colony inside a pressurized, charred chamber of her own body. The smoke from the cautery iron lingers in the rafters, a ghostly veil over a scene of total biological ruin. The surgeon believes his red rod has sealed the gate of life, but he has actually created a pressurized tomb of charred flesh where the sepsis can mutate into its final, most aggressive form. A new threat emerges: the menstrual fury. In the 14th century, it was believed that if a woman's blood was blocked by force, it would reverse its flow and drown the heart. By the end of this part, you'll know the terrifying physical reality of what happens when a body's internal pressure reaches the breaking point. The logistics of the final seizure are a violent display of neurological failure. Alex's brain, starved of oxygen and poisoned by the toxins of the gangrene, begins to misfire. Her body, once limp, suddenly arches into a bridge, the opisthottonos of tetanus reaching its peak. Every muscle in her back and neck is contracted with such force that her own vertebrae begin to microfracture. You hear the sickening, dry crack of bone against bone in the silence of the barn. The charred seal the surgeon created cannot hold back the mounting gas and fluid. It ruptures internally, sending a wave of septic debris into her abdominal cavity, a condition we now call peritonitis. This is the pattern break of the environment. The barn is no longer a place of shelter. It is a pressurized oven. The heat of the summer night, combined with Alex's 106-degree, 41 degrees Celsius fever, makes the air shimmer. The new threat is the holy suffocation. The village priest, seeing that the surgeon has failed, returns with a heavy, silver-bound Bible. He places the massive weight of the book directly onto Alex's chest, believing he is crushing the demon out of her lungs. To a girl already struggling with pneumonia and a crushed rib cage, this holy weight is the final mechanical barrier to her next breath. The payoff is a harrowing irony of medieval faith. As Alex gasps her final shallow breaths, the sin-eater across the room begins to chant in a language she doesn't understand. She is surrounded by help: the surgeon, the priest, the midwife, yet every hand that touches her is a hand that brings death. Her skin undergoes a final color shift, turning a deep, bruised cyanotic blue. The bridge to the end is a single, slow tear that rolls from the corner of her eye, carving a clean path through the soot on her cheek. It is the only pure liquid left in the room. As the light in her eyes finally flickers out, the midwife reaches out to close her lids, but stops. In the 14th century, the debt of Eve is never fully paid until the community is sure the curse hasn't jumped from the dead to the living. The silver Bible remains heavy on Alex's chest, but the heart beneath it has finally surrendered. The midwife's hand froze before closing those eyes, terrified that the corrupt spirit of the first menses would escape the cooling vessel and infect the room. A new threat emerges: the post-mortem purgation. In 1324, a woman who dies of the blood curse is not buried with the honors of a virgin or the dignity of a mother. By the end of this part, you'll know the final irony of how a young girl's transition to womanhood ended in a total erasure of her humanity. The logistics of the disposal are a cold, efficient end to a week of agony. Because Alex died unclean, her body cannot be brought into the church for a funeral mass. Instead of a linen wrap, her body is doused in caustic quicklime before being rolled into a rough hempen sack. The lime is meant to eat the infection and the curse, a chemical fire that consumes her skin, even in death. She is carried to the north side of the churchyard, the side of the unhallowed, where the sun rarely touches the grass and the suicides and unbaptized babies are laid to rest. There is no headstone, only a shallow trench dug into the clay. This is the pattern break of history. We often romanticize the medieval era as a time of knights and courtly love, but for a girl like Alex, the reality was a biological war she was never equipped to win. The new threat to her memory is the silence. Within a generation, Alex will be forgotten, her life reduced to a tally in a parish ledger that likely blamed her own weak nature for her demise. The payoff is the realization that the curse of Eve was not a divine decree, but a man-made cage of filth, superstition, and medical ignorance. Every hand that tried to save her, from the midwife's moss to the surgeon's iron, was a hand that tightened the noose of the sepsis. The story of the first period in the 14th century is a brutal reminder of the high cost of human understanding. We live in an age where biology is a map, not a mystery, and where a young girl's health is a rite, not a ritual of terror. If Alex's journey through the shadows of 1324 made you appreciate the silent miracles of modern medicine and hygiene, then subscribe and hit the bell for more unflinching looks into our cinematic past. It's easy to look back and shudder, but remember, humanity's greatest survival tool wasn't the sword, it was the slow, painful discovery of the truth. Comment below, what part of Alex's struggle surprised you the most? Stay curious, stay grateful, and we will see you in the next reconstruction of the world we left behind.